My name is Elena Brooks. I'm 29 years old, and the night my mother decided to humiliate me, she made sure there were witnesses. It happened at her 15th wedding anniversary, an elegant country club event with crystal glasses, polite laughter, and nearly 60 people who believed they were celebrating a perfect marriage. What they didn't know was that they were about to watch a daughter be erased in real time. I had been invited after nearly a decade of silence. No phone calls. No birthdays. No holidays. Just a cream-colored envelope in the mail, addressed formally, like I was a distant acquaintance instead of her child. I almost didn't go. Almost. But something in me needed closure. Or maybe proof that I wasn't imagining the past. So I showed up alone, carrying a carefully wrapped box in my hands. When I walked into the ballroom, conversations paused just slightly, the way they always do when someone unfamiliar enters a room full of people who think they know everyone who matters. I heard whispers before I saw her. That must be her daughter. I heard she never amounted to much. Didn't she disappear years ago? My mother, Mary Ann Cole, stood near the head table, dressed in silver silk, smiling like a woman who had curated her life very carefully. Her husband, Thomas, sat beside her, holding court with a glass of whiskey and the confidence of a man who believed he owned every room he entered. She noticed me eventually. Her smile tightened. She didn't wave. Didn't approach. Just nodded once, curtly, as if acknowledging a delivery driver. That should have been my cue to leave. Instead, I walked forward. Before I could even say congratulations, her stepson leaned toward me and muttered, "Bold of you to show up. Thought you'd be too embarrassed." I ignored him and placed the gift gently on the table. "Happy anniversary, Mom." She glanced at the box like it offended her. Then she laughed. Not softly. Not kindly. Loud enough for the women beside her to hear. "Well," she said, turning to her guests, "I suppose she finally needed something." A few uncomfortable chuckles followed. Thomas leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning me like I was a bad investment. "We don't expect much," he added. "Elena never could support herself." The words hit harder than I expected, because I'd heard them before. Just never this publicly. My mother didn't stop him. She nodded. "You've always been dependent," she said. "Showing up with some cheap gift doesn't change that." The room went quiet. Then Thomas stood, picked up the box, and shoved it back toward me. "We don't need charity from freeloaders," he said coldly. "Take it and leave." For a moment, I felt 16 again, small, disposable. Then something shifted. I looked at the box in my hands. And smiled. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the box wasn't an apology. It was a test. And they had just failed it. What I did next silenced the entire room, and forced my mother to confront a truth she had buried for over a decade. Before I tell you what was inside that box, or why their words didn't break me the way they expected, you need to understand how we got there. Because no one wakes up one day and becomes disposable to their own parent. That kind of fracture starts much earlier. 12 years earlier, to be exact. I was 17 when the call came. My father, Jonathan Brooks, had been driving back from a short consulting job upstate. He wasn't rich or powerful, just steady. The kind of man who packed his own lunches, remembered dentist appointments, and believed showing up mattered more than saying the right thing. That morning, he kissed my forehead and said, "When I'm back, we'll tour that college you like. Start thinking big, L." He never made it home. A fatigued truck driver drifted across lanes. The impact was instant, they said, clean, merciful. I learned very quickly that words like that are for the living, not the grieving. At the funeral, my mother cried quietly, gracefully. People praised her strength. I stood beside her, numb, waiting for us to fall apart together. We didn't. 2 weeks later, his things were gone. His books. His clothes. The old watch his father had given him. Everything packed into boxes and driven away while I was at school. When I asked where they went, my mother said, "It's healthier not to dwell." I believed her, until I overheard her on the phone that night. "The insurance cleared," she said, excitement slipping through her whisper. We can finally move forward. Forward. As if my father had been a delay. I didn't know then that she'd already met Thomas Cole. Or that their relationship had begun long before my father's accident. Those details surfaced later, piece by ugly piece. 18 months after the funeral, we moved into Thomas's house, his rules, his space, his priorities. I was given the smallest room, a converted storage space with a narrow window that barely let in light. Thomas's son had a private bathroom and a new car. I had a folding desk in silence. When college acceptance letters arrived, mine included a partial scholarship. I needed help covering the rest. $8,000 a year. I asked my mother carefully, politely, like someone who knew asking was already a risk. She didn't even look up from her phone. That money is for rebuilding this family, she said. And you're almost an adult. You should learn independence. Thomas lowered his newspaper and added, "This house doesn't support freeloaders." That was the first time I realized something crucial. I wasn't being raised. I was being tolerated, temporarily. 3 weeks after graduation, I was expected to leave. No plan. No backup. No discussion. That night, alone in that tiny room, I did the math. No savings, no family, no safety net. And for the first time, I wondered if they were right about me. Then my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. A calm voice. "Elena," the woman said gently. "This is Ruth Brooks. Your father's sister." I hadn't heard that name in years. What she told me next changed everything. Because my father hadn't trusted my mother with everything, and he made sure someone else knew the truth. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I remembered Aunt Ruth only in fragments, soft sweaters, careful hugs, the way she always smelled faintly of lavender. After my father's funeral, she disappeared from our lives completely. At least, that's what I'd been told. My mother had called it necessary distance. Now I knew it had been deliberate. "I know your mother doesn't want us talking," Ruth said on the phone, her voice steady but cautious. "But your father asked me to reach out if things ever got difficult." Difficult didn't begin to cover it. We agreed to meet that weekend. I told my mother I was staying with a classmate to study for finals. Instead, I took a long bus ride north, watching familiar streets dissolve into unfamiliar ones, my stomach tight with nerves and something else I didn't yet have a name for. Hope. Ruth was waiting at the station when I arrived. The resemblance hit me instantly, the same eyes, the same quiet way of observing before speaking. She hugged me tightly, like she'd been holding that embrace back for years. "I'm sorry it took so long," she said. Her apartment was modest but warm. Photos lined one wall, my father as a teenager, laughing on a beach I'd never seen. Proof that a whole version of him had existed outside my mother's rewritten history. We sat at her kitchen table. She didn't rush. "Elena," she finally said, folding her hands, "your father was worried. Not about himself. About you." She explained that after marrying my mother, Jonathan had noticed patterns, impulsive spending, priorities that shifted without warning. He loved her, but he didn't trust her with long-term planning. Especially not where I was concerned. "So he planned," Ruth said. I frowned. "Planned what?" She stood, walked to a hallway closet, and returned carrying a small wooden box, simple, worn smooth at the edges, with brass hinges dulled by time. "He gave me this years ago," she said, placing it gently between us. "He made me promise I'd keep it safe. And that I'd only give it to you if you truly needed it." My hands trembled as I opened the box. Inside was a bank passbook. My name printed clearly across the front. Elena Marie Brooks. "He opened it when you were 3, Ruth said softly. "Every month, no matter what, he added something. Sometimes it was small. Sometimes more. But he never missed." I flipped to the final entry. The number made my chest tighten. Enough for tuition, housing, stability. Beneath the passbook was an envelope. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately, neat, familiar, devastating. I opened the letter. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect you the way I wanted to." The words blurred as tears finally came. This money is yours. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to give you choices. He ended it simply. I believe in you. For the first time since his death, I felt something close to safety. Ruth squeezed my hand. When the time comes, she said, you won't be alone. I didn't yet understand how much that promise would matter. Because the moment my mother found out I'd spoken to Ruth, she made one thing very clear: I was no longer welcome in her house. I returned home late Sunday night, my bag heavier than when I'd left, not with clothes, but with truth. My mother was waiting. She stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, the overhead light harsh and unforgiving. Thomas leaned against the counter, watching me the way you watch a problem you're tired of dealing with. Where were you really? She asked. I set my bag down slowly. I went to see Aunt Ruth. The effect was immediate. Her face drained of color, then hardened into something sharp and controlled. I told you, she said quietly, we don't speak to that side of the family. You told me, I replied. You didn't ask. Thomas straightened. You live under my roof, he said. You follow my rules. I met his eyes. For the first time, I didn't look away. This isn't your business, my mother snapped at me. Your father's family has always tried to interfere. No, I said. They tried to protect me. That was the wrong answer. Thomas laughed once, humorless. Listen carefully, he said. You graduate in 3 weeks. After that, you're gone. No extensions. No discussions. My mother said nothing. That silence told me everything. I nodded. Okay. They seemed surprised by how easily I accepted it. What they didn't know was that I already had a plan. A quiet one. One built on something they could never take from me. Graduation day came with perfect weather, and an empty audience seat where my family should have been. I walked across the stage alone, smiled for the camera, and collected my diploma without applause. That afternoon, my mother and Thomas were at a dealership buying his son another car. I was packing 2 suitcases. That was it. Everything I owned fit into them. Before I left, I wrote a single sentence on a piece of paper and placed it on the kitchen counter. Thank you for teaching me exactly who I can depend on. I didn't leave a forwarding address. The bus ride away felt unreal, terrifying, exhilarating. Ruth had arranged a tiny studio near my college campus. Nothing fancy. Just safe, mine. That first night, I sat on the floor, back against the wall, and laughed until I cried. I was free. The years that followed were brutal. I worked every job I could find. Studied until exhaustion blurred the page. Lived on cheap food and stubborn determination. But I didn't fail. I finished at the top of my class. Built a career slowly, quietly. By my late 20s, I was running my own firm. No investors, no handouts. And through all of it, I stayed silent. No social media. No updates. No contact. I thought that chapter was closed. I was wrong. Because 10 years later, an invitation arrived in my mailbox, one that would drag the past back into the light and test whether my mother had learned anything at all. The envelope was elegant, formal, and sent by the very woman who once told me I was nothing without her. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for a full day before I opened it. Cream-colored cardstock. Embossed lettering. My name written formally, like I was a colleague instead of a daughter. The return address made my stomach tighten. Mary Ann Cole. My mother hadn't written to me in nearly 10 years. No calls. No apologies. No curiosity about whether I was alive or struggling. So this wasn't about reconciliation. I slid the card out slowly. You are cordially invited to celebrate the 15th wedding anniversary of Mary Ann and Thomas Cole. A country club. Formal attire. RSVP requested. I stared at it, trying to remember the last time my mother had done anything without a calculation behind it. I couldn't think of one. That night, I called Ruth. She finally reached out, I said. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. I've heard some things. Like what? Thomas's business hasn't been doing well. A failed expansion. Quiet debts. They've been cutting back. That explained the timing. My mother didn't miss me. She needed me. Or rather, she needed what she thought I might provide: sympathy, optics, leverage, a story she could control. Perhaps she wanted to show her guests she was gracious, forgiving. The kind of woman who welcomed her lost daughter back. I ran my thumb over the edge of the invitation. I think she wants something, I said. Ruth didn't disagree. If you go, she said carefully, go prepared. Not hopeful. That night, I made a decision. I would attend, but on my terms. In the weeks leading up to the event, I bought a gift. Not extravagant. Not flashy, intentional. My partner, Daniel, watched me wrap it, his brow furrowed. You don't owe them anything, he said gently. I know, I replied. This isn't about owing. Inside the box was a key. And beneath it, paperwork. Not a gesture of peace. A mirror. I wanted to know, truly, whether my mother had changed or whether time had only sharpened who she already was. The night before the party, I slipped copies of documents into my clutch: bank records, letters, proof. Not to boast. To protect myself. Because I'd learned something young: hope without preparation is just another way to get hurt. The country club was exactly as I remembered from photographs: polished floors, curated smiles, quiet judgment hiding behind champagne flutes. When I walked in alone, heads turned. I felt the weight of every assumption settle onto my shoulders. And then I saw her. Still radiant. Still composed. Still convinced she controlled the narrative. She smiled, just barely. And that was when I knew. This night was not going to end the way she expected. Because before the speeches even began, my mother made sure everyone in that room knew exactly who she thought I was. I didn't approach my mother right away. I took a glass of water from a passing server and stood near the edge of the room, letting the scene settle around me. The country club smelled like polished wood and expensive perfume. People laughed easily, the kind of laughter that comes from believing your life is stable. Across the room, my mother was already performing. I watched her greet guests with warmth, hand on Thomas's arm, telling stories I half recognized and half knew were edited. She looked comfortable, confident, like a woman who had never doubted her choices. Then I heard my name. Well, you know how difficult Elena always was, she said to a small group of women, her voice carrying just enough. She never really found her footing. One of them tilted her head sympathetically. That's so sad. Yes, my mother replied. We tried everything. Support, guidance. But some people just refuse to grow up. Thomas added casually, you can't help someone who won't help themselves. They all nodded. That was the story she'd been telling for years. The reckless daughter. The disappointment. The cautionary tale. I felt something twist in my chest, but it wasn't hurt. It was clarity. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't distance. This was a narrative she'd cultivated carefully, so she'd never have to explain why she'd let her child go. When she finally noticed me standing there, her smile didn't falter. Elena, she said brightly. You made it. I stepped closer. I was invited. She laughed lightly, as if that explained everything. She gestured toward the gift in my hands. That's sweet. You didn't have to. The tone said she didn't expect much. Before I could respond, Thomas leaned over and murmured, just keep things tasteful tonight. I always do, I replied. The guests began drifting toward the tables as the host announced speeches. My mother took her seat at the head table, basking in attention. I stood nearby, gift still in hand. She began speaking about resilience, partnership, rebuilding after loss. Then she looked at me. And of course, she added, smiling sadly, family isn't always easy. Some people take longer to find their place. A few guests glanced my way. I felt the shift, the subtle turning of eyes, the quiet judgment forming. That's when Thomas reached for the box. He picked it up, waited slightly, then set it down with a dismissive chuckle. "We don't need anything," he said loudly. "Especially not charity." The word landed deliberately. My mother didn't stop him. Instead, she nodded and said, "Elena's always struggled financially. We understand." The room went silent. That was the lie. Not a mistake. Not an exaggeration. A decision. And as 50 people absorbed the version of me she'd invented, I realized something powerful. They had no idea who I was. But they were about to find out. Because when Thomas pushed the gift back toward me and told me to leave, I finally decided to stop protecting their image. When Thomas shoved the box back toward me, he didn't lower his voice. He wanted an audience. "We don't need your cheap gift," he said flatly. "Take it and go. You've embarrassed us enough." My mother didn't flinch. She didn't look at me, not really. She looked past me, as if I were an inconvenience interrupting her evening rather than her daughter standing in front of her. "Please," she added coolly, "don't make this harder than it already is." Harder. I looked around the room. Dozens of eyes locked onto me. Some curious. Some smug. A few sympathetic, though none brave enough to speak. I saw the way the story had already settled in their minds. The washed-up daughter. The failure? The one who came back hoping to take something. For years, I'd stayed quiet. I'd let my absence do the talking. I told myself that dignity meant restraint. But dignity doesn't mean silence when someone is rewriting your life in front of you. I took a slow breath. "No," I said. The word was calm, clear. It cut through the tension like a blade. Thomas frowned. "Excuse me?" "I'm not leaving," I said. "And I'm not taking the gift with me." My mother finally looked directly at me, irritation flashing beneath her polished expression. "Elena, don't do this." "Do what?" I asked. "Tell the truth." A murmur rippled through the room. I picked up the box again, my hand steady now. That surprised even me. 10 years ago, my voice would have shaken. Tonight, it didn't. "You spent years telling people I couldn't survive on my own," I said, projecting just enough. "That I struggled. That I failed." Thomas scoffed. "Because you did." I smiled, not kindly, but honestly. "No," I said. "I didn't." I untied the ribbon slowly, deliberately. I wanted them to feel the pause. To sense that something was shifting, even if they didn't yet understand what. My mother leaned forward slightly. "Elena," she warned, "this is not the time." "It's the perfect time," I replied. The lid came off. I turned the open box so the table, and then the room, could see inside. A single silver key rested on a velvet cushion. Beneath it, neatly folded documents. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then someone whispered, "What is that?" I lifted the key between my fingers. "This," I said evenly, "is a key to a 2-bedroom apartment in Manhattan." The room stirred. I unfolded the papers. "And this is the deed. Fully paid." Silence. My mother's face drained of color. Thomas stared, his mouth slightly open, the confidence draining out of him in real time. "I bought it," I continued. "With money I earned. Not borrowed. Not given." A woman near the end of the table gasped softly. I looked at my mother. "I was going to give it to you," I said. "As a chance. A fresh start." Her lips trembled. "But you're right," I added. "You don't need it." I closed the box. And that's when the room truly understood. Because the question everyone was about to ask, out loud or not, was how the daughter they dismissed became the woman standing in front of them. The silence didn't break right away. It stretched, long, uncomfortable, heavy with questions no one wanted to ask first. I could feel the shift in the room, the recalibration happening behind polite faces. Finally, someone did ask. "How?" A woman near the center of the table said softly. "How did you do that?" My mother turned sharply toward her, as if the question itself were a betrayal. I answered anyway. "I left with 2 suitcases," I said. "No safety net. No support. Just the knowledge that I couldn't fail, because failing meant proving a lie true. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I worked through college, waitressed, interned. Took projects no one else wanted. Slept very little. Learned fast. Thomas shifted in his chair, uncomfortable now, small. I built a business quietly, I continued. No announcements. No performances. Just results. I met my mother's eyes again. You told people I couldn't survive, I said. But you never checked. She swallowed. I didn't come back to punish you, I went on. I came to see if there was anything left to salvage. That was when the mask finally cracked. Her voice shook. You left us. I laughed once, softly. No, I said. You let me go. The room absorbed that. The woman beside my mother, someone who'd laughed earlier, looked down at her plate. Another guest cleared his throat and shifted away. Thomas stood abruptly. This isn't appropriate, he snapped. You're making a spectacle. You already did, I replied. I turned back to the guests. I won't stay long, I said. But I want to be clear. I'm not here for money. Or forgiveness. I looked at my mother one last time. I wanted to give you something meaningful, I said. But respect comes before gifts. I picked up the box. I wish you the anniversary you deserve. And I walked away. Behind me, I heard whispers, confusion, regret. And something else. Reevaluation. Outside, the air felt lighter. Daniel was waiting by the car. He didn't ask questions. He just opened the door and took my hand. As we drove away, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. We need to talk. I didn't open it. Because some conversations come too late. I thought that night was the end, but 2 weeks later, my mother showed up at my door, and what she said changed everything. 2 weeks passed. No calls. No follow-ups. No dramatic apologies delivered through mutual acquaintances. I assumed the silence meant the chapter had finally closed. I was wrong. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the knock came, measured, hesitant, like someone unsure whether they still had the right to be there. I opened the door expecting a delivery. Instead, I found my mother standing in the hallway. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just unprotected. No country club. No audience. No Thomas beside her. Elena, she said. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It wasn't polished either. It sounded tired. I didn't invite her in immediately. I didn't know where else to go, she added. That was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. We sat at my kitchen table in silence for a moment. She looked around the apartment, not impressed, not dismissive. Just observant. I didn't know, she said finally. About any of it. You didn't ask, I replied. She nodded, once. I should have. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. Instead, she said something I hadn't prepared for. I told myself a story, she admitted. That you'd fail without us. Because if you didn't, then I had no excuse. I let that sit between us. Thomas is leaving, she said quietly. The business collapsed. The house is going. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just clarity. She looked at me then, not like a possession, not like a problem, but like a stranger she was trying to understand. I don't expect anything, she said. I don't deserve it. For the first time, I believed her. I didn't come back to fix you, I told her. And I won't rebuild what you broke. She nodded again. I know. We sat there a little longer. Then she stood. I'm glad you survived, she said. Even if I wasn't part of it. At the door, she hesitated. You were never a freeloader, she said. That was my shame talking. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, breathing out a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Some endings don't come with reconciliation. They come with release. I picked up my phone and deleted the last unsent draft I'd been holding on to for years. I didn't need it anymore. Because the truth had already spoken, loudly, publicly, and finally, on my terms. And if there's one thing this story taught me, it's this: sometimes the greatest success isn't what you build, it's what you walk away from without guilt.